Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Hong Kong. This is a panel about supply chain and critical mineral. We originally have 25 minutes, and now my time has been cut, and I got 4 speakers, smart speakers here that they have a lot of good point of view. So I'm not going to say other things too much, but go straight to the discussion. My speakers just want to have some sort of opening remarks, on why the critical mineral-related supply chain nowadays is it still leading to Asia, or we would just see a different landscape of supply chain in the world going forward. So I just start with Dario. Dario is an industry player that with the insider's perspective. So your question is to just start with something like a background, like a more general landscape of the supply chain. Why are the rare earths and magnet supply chains concentrated in China? You can just explain something to us.
Yes, thank you, Kandy. I'll first explain where rare earth magnets are used. Basically, there are 3 main areas. One is in your mobile phone, very small magnets. And then now the growing application is in EVs. Each traction motor that powers the car would have 3 to 4 kilograms of magnets. And then thirdly, the wind turbines would have up to 1.5 tons of magnets in them. So rare earth is in the forefront of the green revolution. And I would like to explain how the supply chain has changed over the past 40 years. I'll do it briefly. In the US versus China. The rare earth supply chain consists of 3 main steps: mining, separation, and magnet production. So in mining, 40 years ago, the biggest rare earth mine in the world is actually in the US. It's called Mountain Pass, California, the biggest single site in the world. China had no dedicated rare earth mine, but China is very lucky to have an iron ore mine that contains 5 to 7% rare earth contents. This is in Baotou, Inner Mongolia. So this is the mining area. I think over the years, the Mountain Pass decided to give up for the Chinese to take over because of cost and also environmental reasons. This is the mining area. Second step is to process the ore into oxides. That's called separation. Separation is a very intensive chemical process. And they used to do it in Mountain Pass. Then they decided that not to do it anymore because the Chinese can do it better. Give the dirty work to the Chinese to do. So when Mountain Pass decided to close the mine, they also stopped the separation process. Now, China has the ore, China has the oxides. The next step is the magnet production. These rare earth magnets were first invented, you wouldn't believe it, by GM, by General Motors, 1982. So the factory was in Anderson, Indiana, not far from Indianapolis. I have been to that factory. They ran the factory until early 2000, and then decided to move that factory to China. Now, and then the Chinese industry developed. Now you have the ore, the oxides, and the magnets, the full chain. This used to belong to the US. The US gave up and gave it to China. Now, 30, 40 years later, suddenly it becomes the critical materials that China is trying to dominate. So by talking about the history, you know that this is what happened.
So thanks for the history. From China concentrated supply chain to diversification discussions nowadays. So I just have my question to Lewis. It's more like from the governmental institution perspective. So how can leaders actually achieve continuity and balance to ensure the resilience of supply chain right now? We're talking about all of these challenges that we have. So what can we do in order to enhance the resilience? Given the backdrop is that we have the political climate volatility. And of course, it's especially related to the renewable energy build-out.
Okay, thank you. Well, pretty much, in order for us to have a robust supply chain, we need to consider that before COVID, there were 3 main characteristics. The first one was cost of capital of the supply chain. Second one was the quality of the products of the supply chain. And the third one was pretty much the service that supply chain provided. Right now, what we're seeing and where the governments need to support us is on three more things: is on the adaptability of the supply chain, talking about policy there, sustainability of the supply chain, and finally, on the resilience of the supply chain. So what we're seeing right now on those three additional areas that McKinsey calls out for a supply chain is that they need to create a policy around what is happening just in the region, and then think about the globalization. As you were saying before, is China move and make a big change on the supply chain. Right now, the supply chain for the world, they purchase 30% out of it from China. Okay, and if we think about the U.S., which is the largest market, they have $30 trillion market. So just do that math: $30 trillion market with 30% of the supply chain coming from China. So the regulations need to be there, the policy needs to be there, and as well, governments need to support us as well on the diversifying the policy and diversifying the geopolitical risks that we have. So I think that is the main, let's say, agreement that we need to have from them, and understand as well that the government will move a lot slower than the investor. So it is just create a framework, we'll do it, we'll work on it, and then we'll move on for that.
Right. So we talk about China concentrated supply chain diversification, and now the diversification would just come to some new disruptions, especially since the COVID period. My question would just come to Boris, like what innovations can help balance efficiency with all this kind of new disruptions, especially when sustainability demands that require the rethinking of resource flow suppliers and critical materials reliance.
Thank you. And thank you for the organizers for such an amazing conference. For the context purposes, Open Mineral is effectively building Glencore 2.0, a commodity trading house powered by the digital solutions and data. And in our industry, what is amazing, and I'll refer to your points, in the metal trading, the Chinese smelters are absolutely dominating the world. More than 50% of the global capacity in the metals are located in China because China was ready to produce all the metals around the world. The commodity traders historically have been the pioneers in finding the alternative solutions for the supply chain, because the sheer size of the commodities which are being moved, the complexity of the supply chain, and the value always force the resilience in looking for the alternative solutions. What we use is the platform in order to always look for alternative for every supply chain that we do, because there is no guarantee that one of them will be working. What is interesting, we've been looking at the study by the Bank of International Settlement, and they have shown that the average supply chain has lengthened recently as there are more counterparties staying between the producer and the ultimate buyer of the raw materials, because there is a lack of confidence in the resilience of the supply chains and the diversification that many of the users that are looking for. And the future that we see is Internet of Things, providing the traceability into the flows, giving the confidence in the flow from the producer to the ultimate buyer of the goods around the world. And that helps basically open up to different parts of the evolution of the supply chain. Number one, it provides the mechanism for monitoring the not allowed practices, for example, in the mineral raw extraction, right? And the second is the premiums for the green metals. Today, the metal produced from the hydroelectric power station, electricity, and the coal burning electricity with no capture of CO2 is going to have the same physical parameters and going to have the same price on the market. The real market participants which are ready to pay the premium for the green metals. But in order to do that, you need to have verified supply chain, so people are confident that they are paying for the real green materials. And last but not least, the analytics which is going to be driven by IoT is going to be enhanced by the machine learning that is going to draw the predictability, and insights into the future. And just to give you a tangible example, we are running the machine learning on the data that we have in order to predict the regional supply-demand balances for the different raw materials.
Thank you. I just come to Jerry. You will give us like a more specific point of view from Saudi in terms of supply chain development, especially in a time that there is uncertainties ahead, that we cannot really kind of predict everything. So with the Vision 2030 and the industrialization drive central to that, what is Saudi doing to secure supply chains?
Thank you, Kandy. It's a pleasure to be here. Supply chains are a very important topic globally. They're also very relevant to Saudi at this time. So at the time of this dislocation, Saudi is in the midst of an economic diversification drive, which includes a major reindustrialization of the economy. And to give you a sense of the scale of that, just in automotive, from scratch, we're building an automotive manufacturing sector that's targeting 600,000 light vehicle production by 2035. And it needs to be competitive. 2/3 of that production is meant to be for export markets. So we're building, and we're building at scale. We'll consume about 1 billion tons of cement, 150 million tons of structural steel, and 300 million tons of refrigeration, which incidentally is slightly more than the current installed base in California. So we have real demand for everything. And as my colleagues have been saying, and as we've all experienced, supply chains can be unpredictable. So we're taking steps to secure supply chains. I'll give you a few examples. Our food security platform, which is called SALIC, just invested recently. They bought a 35% stake in Minerva, which is a leading global red meat exporter based out of Brazil. In rare earth metals and minerals, we've set up a joint venture between the PIF and Ma'aden, which is the Saudi leading mining company, to secure supplies of strategic minerals and metals that are critical to our industrialization drive. Recently, we entered into a tripartite agreement between PIF, Aramco, and Bao Steel out of China to set up the first integrated steel plate manufacturing complex in the kingdom. This is important not only to help with the building agenda we have, but it's also an important feedstock for some of the industries we're developing. So these are a few examples. We're still at the beginning, in a sense, that I think you can expect to see across different sectors many more steps to secure supply chains, whether that's in the entire construction value chain, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, et cetera.
Right. As you talk about industrialization and sector development, I have a follow-up question to Dario on industry per se. Is that how the global, you talk about the history, you talk about the change. We're actually facing a new landscape, actually, and the new challenges. So how the global auto industry, that Jerry also mentioned about auto industry before, that is adjusting the situation right now and what challenges they're facing?
In terms of rare earths, I'll give you 3 answers, but I'll do it quickly. I see the clock. American re-engagement, Japanese conservatism, and German pragmatism. And I'll explain a little bit. The Americans have restarted Mountain Pass at a very high cost. They are putting separation back in that location. They're building magnet plants in Texas and I think Oklahoma. Now, of course, this is re-engagement. You're starting that industry again. But we think the challenge would be the cost. We estimate that the cost of that production will be about 50% higher than Chinese local production. So that's the American approach. Japanese conservatism. When the rare earth crisis happened in 2010, the Japanese made the decision to actually produce magnets in China. So they moved bigger production sites, brand new factories to Shanghai area and Guangdong area. And now I think a lot of the Japanese production is actually made in China. And they serve the global market from that location, from these locations. At the same time, they closed the factory in North Carolina they closed a magnet factory in Oklahoma as well. So this is Japanese conservatism. In terms of Germany, I was there 2 months ago. I talked to my customers because I haven't seen them since COVID. I said, so what's your view on decoupling? And the answer was, now, we have this market which represents 40% of our revenue. And it represents 80 to 90% of our component purchases. They're talking about China. What plan B do you think we can have? Because any plan B would mean overturning your own business and giving that market to your competitors. So this is German pragmatism. I think for me, the final answer is welcome back to capitalism and the market economy.
So I like to direct my question to Louis, actually, because as Dario talks about all that kind of different approaches in the world, US, Germany, Japan, China, whatever, I just wonder whether regional bodies nowadays are familiar with the China products to the USA. Do they familiar with that path and practice? And what is it going forward?
Well, it's happening with the US and China. It is that the US found out that China kind of get the biggest grip of the market, okay? So China has been kind of in many boards of mines. So what they call is, the US used to call it end-to-end. What we learned from China, it is mine-to-end, as Dario was saying, is I have the mine and I'll sell it, okay? So what right now the US is doing is they are placing many duties into the Chinese products. So what is happening right now, and that I was talking about regionalization, is understanding where the duties are coming to, so we can provide the right answer to the mid-sized companies, number one, as well to the consumers, so they can have the product. And this is kind of the balancing act that we need to do between risk management and having the flows moving into the country. What we see, since many of our companies sell into the US, what we see is that if we continue purchasing from Asia, yes, we will. That won't change. What we need to understand is how much value add we can do in order to get around or avoid the duties that are placing, so we don't have the consumer paying for it. So what will happen is that the US will go into Mexico in 2026 to renegotiate the USMCA. The USMCA represents 22% of the global GDP of the world. Okay, that is a big market that we need to attend. However, China and India, they have like the 20% of the GDP. So that is why the risk management and that balancing act needs to occur. At the end of the day, what we need to have is the regulation managed by the bodies of the government as well as the private sector.
We heard about the pragmatism from Dario and from Louis already on supply chain, that China still plays a very important role in the entire supply chain development. I just want to have a follow-up question on Jerry then. So what have you done to engage Asian business? You talked about the Vision 2030, you talk about industrialization, you talk about how Saudi work with the other Chinese companies. Can we have more examples to make it more concrete?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So Vision 2030, which is our roadmap, is a great national project, but it requires global resource, global capacity, and global capability to deliver. So engaging the global business community is really a core part of what we're doing. Part of what we do is we explain what's happening. So in the short term, we need builders, we need leaders, and we need partners. We need builders to help us build out all the infrastructure and all the built environment that's required to diversify into the sectors that we're targeting. We need leaders who have competitive technology and capabilities to partner in the industries in which we're building to make sure that we're competitive and future-proof. And then we need partners, like-minded institutions and organizations to help us secure the supply chains that we need to make sure that we can deliver on time. And that's very much what I would think of as the short term. But if you look a bit forward, I think we will pivot from how do you help us to how can we help you. So we're we're very much committed as a country to becoming a global green energy supplier. We're investing in logistics to connect north to south and east to west. And we're friendly people. We're friends with everyone. And so we will become a node in the global manufacturing landscape. And so our message really to industry is, come help us today. And in doing so, benefit tomorrow.
I have my last question to actually Boris, but this question is like a more general question. So after you basically the other speakers, if you want to jump in, then you just give your thoughts to our audience because we have a few minutes left. So my question is I just want to have a more general kind of closure for this panel. It's like, is the world deglobalizing right now, and how would it affect supply chain? So I just start with Boris, and then all three of you just jump in later on.
I think, as everyone else on the panel have said, the world is not deglobalizing, it's reglobalizing. So the supply chains are adapting to the realities, and the people who are able to adapt to the realities, expand the new relationships, will have the outsized returns due to that. I think one element that I wanted to quickly mention up, what is necessary in order for the supply chains to get to the next level is the trade finance. We see the trade finance available for the global trade, at least in the commodity space, has been decreasing because of the complexity of the supply chain and the compliance which is necessary to do, right? And so we need more of the trade finance solution. For example, one thing that we have done recently is we have done the joint venture with TradeFlow on the critical mineral finance fund, in order to be able to use the technology to trace the supply chain and to mitigate the risk, and that allows us to lower the interest rate charged.
Okay, pretty much what I see is that supply chains are kind of like the circulatory system of the body, right? So the circulatory system of the economy. So based on that perspective, what we need to do is anticipate what is going to happen, as well prevent what already happened, okay? So we need to see into the future, but we need to learn from the past. In the middle right now, what is happening is we need to change a few practices, maybe the procurement practices that we have, how we purchase, how we manage warehousing, and how we manage logistics, because we think we know it, but with this reshaping of the processes, how everybody moves, I think we need to just engage differently into that perspective. Right.
I think I have to say there is enough rare earth in the world. There's also enough cobalt in the world. My concerns are actually more on copper and nickel. So these are the big ticket items, not the so-called the minor materials. And China is also worried about not having enough copper and nickel, and that's why China is working together with the world to secure that.
And Jerry?
Thank you. So from my perspective, disruptions in supply chains are inflationary in the sense that they cause duplication of capacity across the supply chains. They cause people to hedge, to protect themselves. And our approach, the way we think about it is, we should be partnering our way through this wherever possible, right? Finding people, finding relationships that help us hedge in a way where we're not necessarily creating overcapacity, where we don't need it. So again, we're open for business and have already started a few discussions in the green room, which I look forward to continuing.
Thank you so much, all. That's it for the panel. It's time's up, and thank you so much for your point of view. I just pass the stage to the next panel. Thank you.